The equation of coefficient of restitution or the concept of coefficient of restitution can also be used when solving unknown quantities like velocities, especially final velocities, as well as the masses. One way of determining whether a collision is elastic or inelastic in nature is by knowing the value of the coefficient of restitution. Coefficient of restitution is defined as the ratio between the relative velocity of recession, say v2 prime minus v1 prime, or the final velocities after a collision between two bodies, and the relative velocity of approach v1 minus v2. It is a number which indicates how much kinetic energy or the energy of motion na tinatawag nga natin remains after a collision of two objects. Coefficient of restitution, or denoted as E, so this is the equation for the coefficient of restitution. Values of E, or the coefficient of restitution, range from 0 to 1. In a perfectly elastic collision, the value of the coefficient of restitution is 1, and the relative velocity after the collision is the same after the relative velocity before it. In a perfectly inelastic collision naman, coefficient of restitution is equal to 0. Example number 1, a ball dropped on a floor from a height of 1.5 meters bounces back to a height of 0.85 meters. What is the coefficient of restitution? In this problem, wala tayong given na values ng velocities, but we can still solve the value of the coefficient of restitution just by deriving the equation. So this is the floor, and ito yung ball. So na-drop siya from a height of 1.5 meters and nag-bounce back siya after the collision. Say dito na tayo. Pababa siya. After the collision, bumalik siya with a height of 0.85 meters. So yung ball ang i-consider natin as the object 1 and yung floor naman ng object 2. Before the collision, of course, yung floor is hindi gumalaw at rest lang siya. Same after the collision. Ibig sabihin, yung V2 as well as V2 prime or yung final velocity after the collision are all 0. So, i-consider natin yung pataas as positive and yung pababa naman as negative. Ang formula again natin for the coefficient of restitution is equal to V2 prime minus V1 prime over V1 minus V2. 0 na sa atin yung V2 prime and V2. 0 na yan. Coefficient of restitution E is equal to negative V1 prime over V1. Ito yung ating positive. From kinematics, meron tayong formula na V square equals V sub O square o yung initial plus 2G Y minus Y sub O, or ito is i-consider na natin as the height na lang. So before the collision, ito, ang initial velocity natin since dinrap lang yung ball from rest, it is 0. V square equals 2 times the gravity, and i-consider na lang natin is yung height nga na 1.5. So ilagay na lang natin as height. Square ng magkabilang side, we have V equals to square root of 2 times gravity times height. Yan yung initial height natin, or yan yung height natin before the collision. Take note, yung velocity natin before the collision, ito, ilagay na lang natin as ito yung V1. Since yung ball lang ang pinag-uusapan natin, pababa siya, so this is negative. Negative din ito. Ito. So ilagay na natin dito as we have negative square root of 2 times gravity times the height initial. At pag-usapan naman natin next is ito naman. So after the collision, dito na tayo. From the formula ulit natin sa kinematics, ang initial ulit natin is 0. So we have V square equals 2 times gravity times height ulit na yung 0.85 na final height after the collision. So ilagay natin dito as prime na lang. Square root ng magkabilang side. So we have V equals the square root of 2 times gravity times height prime. Take note that itong velocity na to is positive na kasi pataas na itong bola. Ito, upward na yung kanyang velocity. So yan na mismong ilalagay natin. Negative square root of 2 times gravity times height prime. Yung negative sa baba, ulitin ko lang, kaya siya negative kasi downward yung motion before the collision. So in this equation na, pwede na natin i-cancel yung negative signs, yung square root of 2g, ang matitira sa atin is square root of height prime over the square root of height. By substituting the values, ang height prime natin is equal to height prime or the final height, 0.85 meters. This is the height after the collision over the square root of 1.5 meters. By calculating, coefficient of restitution is equal to 0.753. Walang unit ang coefficient of restitution. So this is example number 1. Example number 2. A 1 kilogram object moving at 5 meters per second collides with a 2 kilogram object moving in the opposite direction at 4 meters per second. If the coefficient of restitution is 0.7, what are the velocities of the two objects after the impact? For example, this is the 1 kilogram object, object 1, moving at 5 meters per second to the right. And ito naman si object 2, moving at the opposite direction. So, ito siya, 4 meters per second. Assuming na yung right direction ang positive. So, we have V1 as positive 5 meters per second. Ang V2 natin is negative 4 meters per second. Ang hinahanap sa atin is yung final velocities nila after the impact or after the collision. Formula for coefficient of restitution is equal to V2 prime minus V1 prime over V1 minus V2. So, cross multiply natin, we have E times V1 minus V2 equals V2 prime minus V1 prime. Since dalawa yung unknown, kailangan din natin mag-come up with two equations. First equation ang gagamitin natin is yung equation na i-derive natin from the formula or from the equation ng coefficient of restitution. Pangalawa is from the conservation of momentum. Substituting the values, ang value ng E is 0.7 times ang V1 is 5 meters per second minus negative 4 meters per second equals V2 prime minus V1 prime. By calculating 0.7 times 5 minus negative 4 is equal to 6.3 meters per second, V2 prime minus V1 prime. So this is the equation 1. For equation 2, by conservation of momentum, initial momentum is equal to final momentum M1 V1 plus M2 V2 equals M1 V1 prime plus M2 V2 prime. Substituting the values, we have 1 kilogram here times V1 na 5 meters per second plus 2 kilograms times negative 4 meters per second equals mass 1 na 1 kilogram times V1 prime plus 2 kilograms for mass 2 V2 prime. So let's simplify the equation. 1 kilogram times 5 meters per second plus 2 kilograms times negative 4 meters per second is equal to negative 3 kilograms meters per second times V1 prime na lang ito, since 1 lang naman yun, plus 2 kilograms V2 prime. So this is the equation 2. Now we have two equations and two unknowns. Ang gagamitin na algebraic solution is by substitution na lang. Say, sa equation 1, using equation 1, we solve for V2 prime. This is equal to 6.3 meters per second minus V plus V1 prime. And isolve naman natin by equation 2 yung value ng V1 prime. And then isa-substitute natin dito. V1 prime is equal to, lipat natin sa kabila, this is negative 3 kilograms meters per second minus 2 kilograms times V2 prime. Ito na yung value ng V1 prime natin, ilalagay na natin dito. So V2 prime is equal to 6.3 meters per second plus ang V1 prime na natin is negative 3 kilograms meters per second minus 2 kilograms V2 prime. We simplify the equation. V2 prime is equal to 6.3 meters per second minus 3 kilograms meters per second minus 2 kilograms V2 prime. Pagsamahin natin yung terms with V2 prime. So we have V2 prime, lipat na natin sa kabila, magiging positive 2 kilograms V2 prime equals 6.3 meters per second minus 3 kilograms meters per second. Then we combine like terms, continue na natin dito. I-remove na natin yung units para hindi na masyadong complicated yung equation. So we have V2 prime plus 2V2 prime. Na-remove na natin yung kilograms. This is 3 V2 prime na since algebraic solution na ginagawa natin. Equals 6.3 minus 3. We have 3.3. Again, remove na natin itong mga units para hindi na maging complicated yung equation. Pwede na natin isolve yung V2 prime. Divided by 3, both sides. V2 prime is equal to 1.1 meters per second. This is V2 prime. For V1 prime naman, substitute na natin sa equation na to. V1 prime is equal to negative 3. Tanggalin na ulit natin yung units. Minus 2. Substitute natin yung V2 prime. We have 1.1 meters per second and V1 prime is equal to negative 5.2 meters per second. So as we can see, negative yung V1 prime. Ibig sabihin yung 2 kg ball also reverses its direction as a result of the collision. The equation of coefficient of restitution or the concept of coefficient of restitution can also be used when solving unknown quantities like velocities, especially final velocities, as well as the masses. So this is example number 2.